Question number 1. We have Madison's family buys a large bottle of apple juice each week. This week, her family drank 5 liters of apple juice. How many milliliters of juice will Madison's family buy in 3 weeks? So let's reread the first sentence. Madison's family buys a large bottle of apple juice each week. That's not going to help us. This week, her family drank 5 liters of apple juice. How many liters of juice will Madison's family buy in 3 weeks? So those are some important key facts that we need to know. So let's start with, so what do we know? So let's write down that her family drinks 5 liters per week. But we need to find out how many milliliters in 3 weeks. So let's model this with a part to whole using percent proportion. No, sorry, not percent, but just regular proportion. So we're going to compare, we're trying to change liters to milliliters. So let's start with milliliters because we're comparing milliliters to liters. And that's equal to milliliters and liters. So from our reference chart, we know that our scale factor of milliliters to liters is 1,000 milliliters to 1 liter. And from the problem, we know that we're trying to change 5 liters, so that goes on the bottom. So now we need to see what the scale factor is. From 1 to 5 is times 5. So whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top, so that's 1,000 times 5, which means that per week, the family drinks 5,000 milliliters. But we need to know how many in 3 weeks. So if 1 week is 5,000, then this is for 1 week. Then for 3 weeks, it has to be times 3, which is when we multiply many zeros, we can start with the heroes, which is 3 times 5, which is 15. And then we add the zeros, which is 1, 2, 3. So it turns out their family drinks 15,000 milliliters of juice per 3 weeks, which is answer B. A teacher wrote this expression on the board. 3 times -2 plus -8. So since we are multiplying and adding integers, I'm going to want to remember the rules for multiplying integers is in terms of what kind of sign I should have. And remember, we can make the tic-tac-toe sign just to remind ourselves that a positive times a negative is a negative, and a negative times a negative is a positive. So let's start with 3 times -2 plus -8. So let's start with multiplication, which is 3 times -2 is a -6, plus we have -8. And then when we have a -6 and a -8, we have 6 going to the left and 8 going to the left. Or if you want to think about it, we have villains and more villains. So our answer should be in the negative direction towards the villain side. So 6 plus 8 is 14, and the answer is -14. Nora worked in her yard for 2 hours. She mowed for 45 minutes and raked for 33 minutes, and weeded the garden for the rest of the time. What percentage of Nora's time working in her garden was spent weeding the garden? So we need to find out about weeding the garden. So let's capture what we know. It says Nora worked. So what we know is that she worked for 45 minutes mowing. That was 45 minutes. And she raked for 33 minutes. So the rest of the time was spent weeding. And we need to know how much time that was. So we're going to represent that with n. And then it says what percentage of time was she weeding. So we're trying to figure out the percentage of time. So we are going to need a part over a whole. And we need the percentage, which is over 100. Now, the only problem is that it says that she worked for 2 hours. So how many minutes is 2 hours? Well, I know 1 hour equals 60 minutes. So 2 hours must be twice as much. And that would be 120 minutes. So now all we have to do is figure out what 45 plus 33 is, because that's the number of minutes we're given. That's 78 minutes. And we need to subtract that from the whole, which is 120. So as we said before, we have 120 minutes, and part of it is 45, part of it is 33, and now we need n. So we're going to subtract 120 minus 78, and that gives us 42 minutes. And so what is 42 over 120? How do we get from 120 to 100? Well, that's difficult because 120 doesn't go into 100 evenly. So let's simplify first. We can simplify 42 and 120 by 6. We can divide by 6. And that means we'd be left with 42 divided by 6 is 7. And 120 divided by 6 is 20. And we'll rewrite the proportion on the side. And we know that the scale factor is 5. So whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. So 7 times 5 is 35, which means that 35% of the time was spent weeding. This is question 7 on the formative. This is a table. How do you get to school? Based on the table, how many students out of 300 students would be expected to walk or bike to school? So let's take a look. It says how many students would be expected to walk or bike to school? That would be walk, and this would be bike. So let's first look at what we know, and we know that 1/10 of the students walk to school. And we also know that for bikers, it's 3/10. So because it asks for which ones walk or bike, we have to add the two of those fractions together. And so that means altogether 4/10 of the students bike or walk. And so that's the part to the whole. And we want to predict, what if we had 300 students? Then what part of the 300 would be walkers and bikers? And so we're going to write 4/10 is equal to 300. So how many times does 10 go into 300? It is 30. And so the scale factor is times 30. So 4 times 30 would be 4 times 3, which is 12, and add a 0. So n equals 120. That means 120 students walk or bike to school. George scored 85% on a science test. Which fraction is equivalent to 85%? So let's first write 85% as a fraction. So we know that 85%, that's what we're changing. And remember, the percent sign means out of 100. So 85% is 85 out of 100. And so we can first simplify by 5. And we're left with 20. And 5 into 85 is 17. And there we have it, 17/20. There are 72 items on Ginny's bookshelf. This is question 11. 1/3 of the items are hardcover books. 4/9 of the items are softcover books. The remaining items are DVDs. How many DVDs are on Ginny's shelf? So we're looking for DVDs. So what do we know so far? We know that 1/3 is equal to hardcover books. Hardcover. And then 4/9 of them are softcover. Now, since we have two different denominators, it's kind of difficult to compare them. So let's change 1/3 and see what 1/3 is as ninths. So we can multiply 3 times 3 to get 9. And so 3/9 would be the hardcovers. And so now we have, let's look at that part by whole model. We have one part, 3/9, which is hardcover, and we have soft covers that are 4/9. And obviously the whole is 9/9. So what are we missing? What fraction of the DVDs are, what part of the ninths? So obviously 3 plus 4 is 7. So this must be, the DVDs must be 2/9. And so once we know that, we can look at the part to whole, because we're looking at, we know that 2/9 are hardcovers if we had 9 books, but we have 72. So let's find the scale factor from 9 to 72 is times 8. So 2 times 8 is 16. So it should be 16 of the items are DVDs.